In today's video, we're going to break down how the carnivore diet affects where you store your body fat. A lot of people go on the carnivore diet and they notice they start storing fat differently. The first thing we're going to consider is how men and women store body fat differently. Men tend to store more body fat in the abdominal region. Now there's an evolutionary reason behind this, which goes as follows. Because men were involved in more combat, more battle over time, they develop more fat around this region in order to protect their organs. Women tend to store more body fat in the hips, thighs, and buttocks. One of the key reasons for this is that it helps to give birth. When they have more fat in this region, it widens the pelvic structure and it makes it a lot easier to give birth. It also protects the baby during pregnancy, and more fat in these areas is linked to higher fertility. And again, like it did with men, hormones also play a role in this too. An interesting fact is that it's for those reasons there that men are attracted to an hourglass figure. The next thing we're going to look at is how hormones affect body fat distribution. I genuinely think it could play more of a factor than genetics. It's at the point now where I can just look at someone and tell you what they're eating based on how they store their fat. The first hormone we're going to look at is cortisol. Now, cortisol is technically considered a stress hormone, however, it's responsible for numerous roles in the body. When cortisol levels are elevated, it promotes the accumulation of fat in visceral fat deposits. Now, these are usually located around the abdominal organs. Now, these fat stores are a lot more responsive when your cortisol levels are elevated. So what happens is when your cortisol elevates, you tend to store more body fat in the stomach region. And here's the thing, when your body is more inflamed, your body's in more of a fight or flight state. And because cortisol is a stress hormone, it's going to elevate and you're going to store more fat in the belly region. This right here is the reason why so many people seem to be skinny everywhere and have a massive pot belly. They eat super high inflammatory foods, their cortisol levels are cranked right up, and as a result, the majority of the fat they gain goes straight to their belly. The next hormone we're going to look at is estrogen. And to super oversimplify, what estrogen does is it basically makes you more feminine. Now, it's not that straightforward, and you don't want super high estrogen levels, even if you want to be a super feminine woman, because it will mess with things like your emotional state and stuff like that. It's actually a very complicated thing. However, as a general rule, the higher your levels of estrogen, the more fat you'll store in your subcutaneous fat deposits. Now, subcutaneous fat is fat that's stored just below the skin, and it's a lot more abundant in areas like the hips, like the waist, and like the buttocks. Women have higher estrogen levels than men, for the most part. I mean, nowadays there are quite a few men that seem to have quite a bit of estrogen, but that's not the point. Anyway, as I was saying, women tend to have more estrogen than men. So this right here is another reason why women store more fat than men in those areas. Now, there are so many other hormones like testosterone, growth hormone, insulin, thyroid hormones that affect how you store your body fat. However, the primary two that have the largest effect are cortisol and estrogen. Hormone and fat storage is incredibly complicated, but as a general rule, the more balanced your hormones are, meaning the closer they are to a natural, healthy state, the more normal and the better your fat will be distributed. Meaning that if two identical twins both gain 10 kilograms of fat, whoever had the better hormone profile would store this fat more evenly distributed, which would not only give the illusion that they're leaner, but it would just give them a much more natural look. When you see people that store fat in a very unnatural and weird way, say for example they store a lot of fat in a certain region, it sort of just gives a weird and unnatural look, which you can almost just sense that the person's unhealthy. Now, there's obviously a genetic component. Our ancestors came from different places, and over time species always adapt. There's definitely survival advantages to storing fat in different places. Like I mentioned earlier with the men storing more fat around their belly. However, every hypothesis as to why this is the case is pure speculation. No one really knows the true evolutionary reason as to why there is this genetic variation. So what does it mean if you are storing fat in certain areas? First, we're going to have a look at men. If you're storing fat around your hips, waist, and buttocks, you likely have high estrogen levels. Now, the reason for this is likely because you are consuming too many phytoestrogens. How phytoestrogens work in the body is because they have a very similar structure, they mimic estrogen, and as a result, you store more fat in your subcutaneous fat depots. Now, if you have a massive beer belly and not too much fat elsewhere, it's likely you had high cortisol levels. Now, if you're someone who stores more fat in your limbs, it's much more likely that this is a result of your genetics. And if you're a man who has pretty normal fat distribution, meaning you store it evenly, it doesn't look irregular, then it's much more likely you have a good normal hormone balance. Guys, I'm incredibly sorry, this is super unprofessional of me. However, I'm editing my video now, and I've noticed a massive part of it is just like corrupted itself. So, I'm just going to repeat what I said. Let me move to the side so I can put my slideshow there. Basically, if you're a woman and you're storing the majority of your fat in your hips, thighs, and buttocks, it likely means that your hormones are where they should be, as this is how women are meant to distribute their fat. Anyway, I think that's all that got cut out, so back to normal. Only to a certain point, however. Like I mentioned earlier, you don't want your estrogen to be too high. So if you are someone who stores a bizarre amount of fat in those regions, I would speculate you probably have some mood issues as well. And again, as with men, if you're storing lots of fat in your belly region, it likely means you have high cortisol. And again, like with men, if you're storing more in your limbs, it's likely to be more genetic. I also want to clarify, it doesn't mean your hormones are like this now, but when you gain the fat, it's likely that your hormones were in this way. Another thing that might affect your fat distribution is your age. For men, as you get older, your testosterone levels decrease. When you have high levels of testosterone, you tend to store your body fat a little more normally, I guess you could say. And because your testosterone is decreasing and your estrogen and cortisol levels are staying similar to as they were, what could happen is that you're going to store fat a little bit more, well, I guess weirdly. And for women, as you age, your estrogen also tends to decrease a bit. However, if you're eating the proper human diet, as I'm about to get into soon, your hormones will regulate themselves and you do not have to worry about this at all. So how will the carnivore diet affect how you store your body fat? First, let's look at men. Your testosterone is going to increase, your cortisol is going to decrease, and your estrogen is going to decrease. For optimal health and to overall just feel amazing, if you're a man, this is exactly how you want it to be. Consequently, because your hormones are now regulated, you're going to store fat in a much more normal way. It's going to look a lot healthier, and even if you were to gain the same amount of weight, you'd notice it a lot less when you're on carnivore in comparison to a regular diet. Now, to be clear, I'm not advocating for that, I'm just saying that would happen. And for women, your testosterone and estrogen levels will regulate to where they're meant to be. As a woman, you don't want your testosterone to increase too high because it'll make you masculine, and you also don't want your estrogen too high either, because as I talked about earlier, it's going to mess with things like your mood. But you also don't want it too low either, because it's going to mess with things like your cycle and just how you feel in general, as well as the fact that your cortisol levels are going to decrease. So now, because these hormones are at the level they're meant to be at, it means you're going to store fat in a much more natural way, and it's just going to look a lot better, like it does with men. You're not going to have the cortisol pot belly, you're not going to be storing an absurd amount of fat in regions like your hips. It's just going to look normal and more natural in general. So yeah, in summary, when on the carnivore diet, you're just going to store your body fat in a much more normally distributed way. Now, up until recently, I went on a bulk as say. I ate an absurd amount of meat and I gained about 7 kilograms. However, this 7 kilograms didn't seem to look as bad as it did in the past when I would gain this amount of weight. Now, obviously it looked better when I was super lean and I'm on my way to get back there right now. But it is very interesting to me how even though I gained the exact same amount of weight, it looked completely different on me. I think this right here, along with the fact that your hormones are more regulated so you can think a lot clearer, is one of the main reasons why people seem to be a lot less body conscious once they get on the carnivore diet. Anyway guys, I hope some of you found this video useful. If you have anything to add, leave in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more of my content, consider subscribing. It's completely free and it means you'll see more videos like this. Also, YouTube reckons you'll like this video of mine, so if YouTube's got it right, click that button. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.